Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another round of Humanism 101. Today, we're talking about critical thinking, cognitive biases, and logical fallacies. During times with social media serving as the great echo chamber, feeding us information that we tend to like and avoiding information that we tend to dislike, and almost being conditioned to avoid people that might get on our nerves or we might find obnoxious instead of doing our due diligence to stick together and to appreciate each other for our differing opinions and realizing that differing opinions keep us honest. We tend not to be doing that now. And it's not just a matter of another person might be incorrect. They might be incorrect or we might be incorrect. And not only is it our job to serve as a sounding board for other people, but it's also our job to do that due diligence with ourselves. There was an essay by Bertrand Russell in which Russell writes that man is a rational animal, or so I'm told. And in it, he talks about how to tell if your own biases are taking over your general mental faculties. He says if you hear an opinion contrary to your own and you experience pity, that's one thing. But if you hear a contrary view to your own, minus verbal assaults, if you hear a contrary opinion to your own and you're getting a deep visceral anger about it, that perhaps you should go study up on the other person's opinion. Figure out where they're coming from. Figure out how they came up with their ideas and engage with them. Our next Humanism 101 is going to be on democracy. And one of the values of democracy is engagement and having a thriving marketplace of ideas. And if you want to be a good actor in that marketplace of ideas, it's essential to understand your own biases as well as others. So today, we are going to go over a new round of Humanism 101, where we're talking about logical fallacies, cognitive biases, and critical thinking. Today is our Logical Fallacy Clinic. And throughout today, we'll be talking about cognitive science and cognitive biases, logic and logical fallacies, and we'll be playing around with some logical fallacies. Today is a day to understand, and it's also a day to chime in. I would like today's lecture to be fairly interactive. The Mandela effect. There's something out on the internet called the Mandela effect. Are you guys familiar with the Mandela effect? It's this idea that you're absolutely certain about something from an earlier time had occurred, and then you see information to the contrary. Why it's called the Mandela effect is it's named after an internal cognitive dispute over when Nelson Mandela died. Some people thought it was earlier, and then later he had his funeral when he died. Another example of this is the Berenstain Bears. Some of us born after 1970 remember these books from when we were children. Which one was it? Which one was it? Some people assume that it's Berenstain Bears, and they found cognitive dissonance over it being Berenstain Bears. But it's the Berenstain Bears. So essentially in this, your brain doesn't care what you think. There are cognitive biases, cognitive processes, logical fallacies that might paint a different world than the one that actually exists. And these little guideposts of how our brain presents the world to be might throw us off. It might be a deliberate obfuscation from an outside source to try to manipulate us, or it might just be accidental. But either way, if we have a commitment to the truth, if we have a commitment to be better thinkers and more responsible thinkers, we should understand the impact of cognitive biases. We should have a working knowledge of logic, rhetoric, and reasoning. And we should discuss basic logical fallacies. It's kind of fun. And we'll get to that near the end of today's lecture. So, critical thinking, your brain strives for consistency and doesn't care what you think. Our brain loves consistency. We have this interesting effect called pareidolia. And pareidolia is where you will look at a cloud or you'll look at a piece of toast and you'll see a face in it. If you remember the images that came out after September 11th, in the smoke from one of the towers, people said that they saw the face of a demon. Some people say that they've seen the image of Jesus in a piece of toast. Our brain likes to put patterns together. It's called pareidolia. And like I had said, there are both deliberate and unintentional deviations from sound logic that have the potential to exploit you. And what's your inoculation against this? It's not exclusive, but a good way to fight against being exploited by the misuse of logic and the abuse of certain forms of reasoning is critical thinking. Cognitive science and cognitive biases. Cognitive sciences are the study of how the brain works and processes information. And I'm going to give some interesting examples of how your brain processes afferent visual information. And then we'll go over some of the social science. I love social science. And I think that there's some really interesting stuff that the social scientists will tell us when it comes to how we see the world and how we are impacted and influenced by our biases and our misconceptions. A lot of it has to deal with how others influence us. So cognitive sciences, we can also look at the science of vision, and our brain likes to fill in the blanks. It likes patterns. Our brain fills in the blanks in one aspect of how we receive information by the fact that where the optic nerve attaches to the retina, we have a blind spot. Unless it's significantly pronounced, and unless you ever were told that you have a blind spot, you probably never noticed because our brain fills in the blank, it fills in the picture. Additionally, talking about blind spots and blindness, there's another interesting factor called change blindness, where our brains seek consistency and our brains might plaster over a minute change that happens to something in our visual field and we become unaware of it. Additionally, there are optical illusions. Part of how our brain experiences patterns plays into these optical illusions, and I'll get to those in just a moment. Additionally, we have issues with selective attention. And for those of you who are familiar, yes, I'm going to show the Simon's selective attention test. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, count the number of times the basketball has been passed. Optical illusions. This is a series of dots. Just a series of dots. But what is the optical illusion here? Anybody?
Cube.
What's the front of the cube?
What's that?
Which is the front of the cube and which is the back?
That too. See, there are two optical illusions at play in this. We're seeing these dots like it's through a perforated membrane, and we look as though there's a cube in front of us. And the question is that cube that we're seeing going up into the left or going down into the right? How are you guys seeing this? Which way is the cube coming at you? Up into the left or down into the right?
It's jumping back and forth.
Was it jumping back and forth before that question was asked, or
No,
did that introduce a new stimulus to see it as the other way? So now your brain is trying to negotiate which one that it is.
I think most people see it coming down to the right just because the way we do artwork and presentation in the United States.
I saw up and to the left first, and then it took me a while to really see down and to the right.
And now is anyone like Dr. Jim, is anyone else doing this back and forth with their brain where they're seeing it, then it's flashing to the other side?
Oh yeah.
now it's sticking to the right. It's not jumping.
You fixed it, Jason.
Thank you. Okay. And I don't have a pointer here, but if you see this cube, in the top center, there is a square of a different color than the ones on a unique color to the top of the top side. And then you see a square in the direct center of the bottom facing side of the side closest to us. And of course, this is an optical illusion as well, because this is a two-dimensional image, but it appears three-dimensional. And then at the bottom, you see another tile at the very bottom. So essentially, bottom center, you see a tile. Bottom left side facing us, you see a center tile. And then top side, you see another tile. So here's the question. What color are those three tiles?
They're all the same.
Yep.
You got to hold something next to them. That's what I did.
But I didn't move the image at all. It's in the same place. I just blacked out the rest of the screen. But as you can see, they're the same color. But with the deviation in coloration on the image, we see that one looks orange and the others look kind of a tan color, a caramel color. So now with this, and as I go through this lecture was pieced together, harvested from previous 101 lectures on logical fallacies with some new information put into this. So if there's any attributions that need to be made that haven't been made, that's purely accidental, and this is for educational purposes. So I'm claiming fair use on this. But watch this video.
This is a test of selective attention. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many passes did you count?
13?
Correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
No.
I saw it this time because I've seen this before. It just didn't work.
This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris and is copyrighted.
Technically, it wasn't a gorilla. It was just somebody in a gorilla suit.
DVDs from Bizcog Productions.
Yeah.
Learn more at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
All right, any thoughts so far? What are you guys' thoughts on selective attention, on optical illusions?
Well, you have to be aware of them, that's for sure.
And now, Jim, are you going to be looking for gorillas everywhere you go?
Well, I lost track of trying to count by 7. After that, I couldn't see anything really.
All right, any other thoughts?
That's how a musician does his trick on us
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the time.
And we have cognitive biases that we experience in how we see the world. Agent detection. This is a cognitive bias that we perceive that there's an intelligent agent behind things like natural acts. Some people say that this led to the invention of gods. I think this is also called hyper intentional awareness. It comes along with this idea of the theory of mind, and we've discussed this before. There's the confirmation bias that we're far more friendly to data and the data and information that supports what we already believe. Then there's the framing effect. How something is presented to you, either in a negative or positive light, has an effect on how we see the world. The bandwagon effect. I might piss some people off in here because this is Southern California, but when I used to eat meat, I was not a big fan of In-N-Out. For me, I thought In-N-Out carried a lot of the bandwagon effect in which people went there because that's what the crowd was doing, and it was popular because the crowd liked it. Any argument on that? Is In-N-Out superior, or is In-N-Out benefited by the bandwagon effect? Or do you go there because you like the Bible verses on the bottom of the packaging?
Oh my gosh.
In-N-Out, it has good food.
Well, it had a sexual connotation for me.
a little double entendre there. Did you like it animal style, Jim?
Kitty style.
Which is one of the particular things you can order there. It has the special sauce on it. But yeah, did you not know that there were Bible verses on the bottom of the package? And then of course,
I knew there was
go ahead.
I knew there was Bible verses on In-N-Out, so I stopped eating there years ago.
Well,
I kept dumping my drink out on people trying to read it. It was on the bottom. Terrible.
That would do it for me too.
well, the Christian thing is to turn the other cheek, right? And then you dumped it out on the other cheek. And then there's the halo effect that we tend to give more leniency to those we have a positive opinion of. And of course, this one is commonly spoken about on the internet. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's this thing that's been noticed where the lower your task mastery or complement of knowledge on a particular subject is, the more overconfident you might be in your ability to do something, or your general knowledge of the subject. Now we move on to behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is a subset of economics, and what it does is it combines economics with the cognitive sciences. And for a long time in political science and economics, there was this school of thought called rational choice theory. It's this idea that we are rational actors and we seek to maximize benefits and minimize costs. And that under all circumstances, rational actors would choose make similar choices, and that is presumed that we have enough information to do so. But universal information is not in the equation. And secondly, we have a great deal of influence from outside sources over how we make our decisions. And if you would like to know more about behavioral economics, get Dan Ariely's amazing book, Predictably Irrational. Ariely talks about certain biases, one of which is arbitrary coherence, where it's like a duckling or a gosling imprinting on a particular character and just sticking with it regardless of who that character is. And if, for example, if you were to buy something from a particular brand, buy an item from a particular brand, you might be sticking with it despite the fact that that might not be the most affordable, which someone in a rational choice mindset would say, why are you spending $1,000 on that iPhone when I can go get this off-brand phone for $100? And that iPhone, you can't customize it. You can't go and change the pieces inside that, the components. There's a European cellular phone manufacturer that sends you a kit, and you can have interchangeable parts, and it's cheaper, and you can update the particular pieces. But when you have an iPhone, you might have had an Apple product, an iPhone, for the last 10, 15 years. I mean, I personally am a victim of arbitrary coherence. I am recording this on an iMac, and next to me I have my iPad. On my wrist I have my Apple Watch, which I usually listen to music through on my AirPods, and that's connected to my iPhone. And other phones, other products might be cheaper, they might be more durable, but I'm stuck with my iPhone. Additionally, what Ariely talks about is he talks about the way that businesses can tap into irrationality in regards to trying to sell you something. One of the tricks that they use, and he brings up subscriptions to The Economist, where they bring out several choices. One is the paid subscription to the magazine. One is the digital subscription, and one is the paid subscription to the magazine plus the digital subscription with a slight differential in price. But what ends up happening is that you choose one because you see a comparison of two similar things next to each other. He also talks about real estate, in which if somebody wants to try to sell a house, they can take two ranch style houses and a Victorian style house, and having three things to compare against each other. Our brains don't particularly like that. So he can try to sell one of the ranch style houses that's just slightly better than the other ranch style house, because your brain will not be choosing and selecting between the Victorian and the ranch styles. It will automatically go between the two ranch style homes. And just little things like this in how our brains work. And a rational choice mind would look at this and weigh out all of the different choices equally. But our brains don't operate rationally. We have biases that affect us in our market choices. Then we have biases that affect us in our institutional choices. We'll go to behavioral politics, a similar subset of political science that's like behavioral economics. It combines the cognitive sciences with political science. And again, rational choice theory, we have behavioral politics. And if you want to talk about one particular bias, this is also for sociology, psychology, anthropology, and political science, it's the interviewer bias, where if you're doing an interview for a survey and you're speaking to someone in person or on the phone, but you're connecting to a living, breathing human being, you're far more likely to say socially acceptable responses to the interviewer's question than if you were just going online and filling out a form. If you were doing that, you far more likely to be honest in what you're doing. For example, one of the things in surveys is about church attendance. And the average person, if they're talking to someone who is calling them on the phone or meeting with them in person doing a survey, they're far more likely to say that to inflate the frequency at which they attend religious services in person, and they're far more likely to be congruent with the actual number of times that they attend church services and religious services on a online form. And then you have other heuristics like the desert heuristic. That's in terms of how deserving you think a particular individual is how more likely you are to support social services. Then there's the likability heuristic, and this is looking at who you are more closely attached to politically in terms of partisan affiliation or political orientation. From this book, which is a fantastic book called Reasoning and Choice by Snyderman, Brody, and Tetlock. I highly recommend it if you guys want to know more about political psychology. The likability heuristic is one that it's knowing what side that she's on and knowing also that she dislikes conservatives. She will tend to maximize the difference between her position and theirs, a so-called contrast effect. So basically, if you are a Republican and you know what the Democrats support, you're going to end up
Not so loud.
being far more antagonistic to positions that the Democrats are affiliated with. Conversely, if you're a Democrat and you are thinking about voting for a candidate or a proposition, and you know what side the Republicans tend to support as a party platform, you're going to be far more antagonistic and have more antipathy towards that particular political perspective. And there are ways around all of this: critical thinking, discernment, and logical fallacy identification. Critical thinking is about common sense and evaluating truth. Looking at certain scenarios with the critical eye. Everything should be open to critical analysis. A couple little quotes here for you from Karl Popper. I hold that orthodoxy is the death of knowledge, since the growth of knowledge depends entirely on the existence of disagreement. And of course, Thomas Jefferson, question with boldness even the existence of a God, because if there be one, he must more approve the homage of reason than that of blindfolded faith. And Socrates, we all know this one: the unexamined life is not worth living. Critical thinking is our inoculation against bullshit. Discernment is knowing when something's important. Mark Twain said lies, damn lies, and statistics. Of course, you can use numbers to fool people, but if you know how, if you have a working knowledge of statistics, you have better discernment over whether they're lies or damn lies or accurate information. So logic and logical fallacies. You may have heard of syllogisms before. You probably have. Syllogisms, a basic, this is 101. They come with a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. Additionally, there's something called validity and there's something called soundness. In a valid argument, the premises add up to the conclusion. But if any of the premises are not true, then you don't have soundness. Soundness occurs when you have two true premises leading up to a sound conclusion. For example, all men are from Mars, I'm a man, therefore I'm from Mars. That's a valid argument, but that's an unsound argument. There's different types of reasoning. And I want to bring up Hume and the naturalistic philosophy. Hume didn't have the naturalistic philosophy, but I want to bring up as well as the burden of proof. When someone is making an argument, don't let them cast the burden of proof upon you. If someone's making a claim, it's upon them to prove or otherwise what they're saying, not upon you. So when someone's trying to argue with you about politics or religion and they're making a claim, it's not your responsibility or duty to disprove or prove what they're saying. The proof is in the pudding, and they're holding the pudding, so the proof is upon them. So types of reasoning, we have inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, you're looking at specific instances and you're trying to form a bigger generation, a greater generation. It's bottom-up logic. Basically, you look at little things that are happening in the environment around you, and from particulars, you go towards the general. You observe things, you find a pattern, you develop a theory. B doesn't necessarily follow A. A, B, C, but B doesn't always follow A. Then deductive reasoning, it's top down. Basically, it's a closed system where you're working from an established theory, and then you're making your reasoning based upon what the established theory says, and looking at the particulars. It's top down. Lastly, abductive. Abductive is a form of reasoning that it's post hoc ergo propter hoc, where you're looking at a particular circumstance and then you say this happened, and this is something that usually happens when this happens, so therefore this is what has happened. A great example that I found for this in a lot of sources is, the roof is wet this morning. The roof gets wet when it rains, therefore it must have rained last night. Because of this. This is abduction. So 3 types of reasoning to think about. Additionally, David Hume, is versus ought, treatise of human nature. It's when you're looking at a positive statement and a normative statement, you're going to think of is or ought. A positive statement is an empirical statement positing what exists in nature, and a normative statement is what you should do. And if there's an argument over what exists, it doesn't necessarily entail what you should do with that fact or that knowledge. Additionally, arguing over what you should do doesn't necessarily entail that what you're talking about exists. And one thing that's closely affiliated with this is the naturalistic fallacy. You might have heard of this before, but it basically says, if it's natural, it's good. So that's applying a valuative statement to something epistemological. It's saying how something ought to be because it exists. So that is the naturalistic philosophy. On to rhetoric, different types of modes of persuasion. You have ethos, that's an appeal to authority. You have logos, an appeal to facts, and pathos, which is an appeal to emotion. So on to logical fallacies. And with logical fallacies, I'm going to go through some of these, and then we'll practice with them. We'll chat, we'll come up with examples, and I think this is kind of fun. We've had fun with this at previous lectures on this in the past. So common fallacies: ad hominem, argument from ignorance, appeal to improper authority, begging the question, circular reasoning, equivocation, no true Scotsman, false dichotomy, genetic fallacy, moving the goalpost, post hoc ergo propter hoc, ergo abductive reasoning, shifting the burden of proof, and the slippery slope. You probably heard all of these before. If you're interested in logic and arguing, you might have a desire to learn these and have a basic working knowledge of where these fit in terms of logical reasoning. And we're going to go over this because you might hear people arguing, saying, you're equivocating, or that's a slippery slope. Oh, don't throw a straw man at me. Oh, this is a red herring. And some of us, we are adept at this, and we can play this like a fiddle. But for other people, and you're interested in this, this is a great 101. So there are two main sets of logical fallacies. One is in the structure of the argument, and one is about making valid arguments that aren't sound. So formal, affirming the consequent, the existential fallacy, and the illicit process. The illicit process is usually grouped between illicit major and illicit minor. So affirming the consequent In inductive reasoning, where the consequent is said to be true, so the antecedent is said to be true as well. If P then Q, Q therefore P. If an animal is a dog, then it has 4 legs. My cat has 4 legs. Therefore, my cat is a dog. So we're affirming the consequent in this one. The major premise, the first is the antecedent, and then there's the consequent following that. Additionally, we have the existential fallacy. It's a categorical syllogism employing 2 universal premises, all to arrive at a particular some conclusion. There's some validity, but it's unsound. All X are Y, all Z are X, therefore some Z are Y. It's not saying all of everything. And the other thing is that the particular participants in this particular equation don't have to have actually existed. All forest creatures live in the woods. All leprechauns are forest creatures. Therefore, some leprechauns live in the woods. This statement does not require the existence of any actual leprechauns. It's called an existential import. Illicit process, of course, major and minor. And this is just looking at the mechanics of the argument. The ones that you're going to be thinking of when you're talking about logical fallacies are all informal logical fallacies. They're the ones like gambler's fallacy or post hoc ergo propter hoc, begging the question, tu quoque, etc., etc. It's a syllogistic error in which either the major premise or minor premise is not distributed in the conclusion, where the illicit aspect of the process in this form of fallacy is on the major premise, all dogs are mammals. No cats are dogs, so therefore no cats are mammals. Everything is contingent upon dogs, but cats can be mammals too. Additionally, all cats are felines, all cats are mammals, therefore all mammals are cats. And as you can see, the major premise is conclusive. And the second one, the minor premise, is conclusive. It's categorical. And it has an impact on the minor premise and a major premise illicit process, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to play around with this, any examples that you can come up with affirming the consequent existential or illicit process? This is just a warm up. So the next one is more commonly spoken about logical fallacies. Now we're in informal. Linguistic fallacies are some of my favorites because I love puns. Equivocation. And this comes from the Texas State University Department of Philosophy at Texas State University. The fallacy of equivocation occurs when a key term or phrase in an argument is used in an ambiguous way with one meaning in one portion of the argument and then another meaning in another portion of the argument. Examples from Texas State. The laws imply lawgivers. There are laws in nature. Therefore, there must be a cosmic lawgiver. Sure, philosophy helps you argue better, but do we really need to encourage people to argue? There's enough hostility in the world. Valid, unsound, but this is changing the definition of what we're working with. And the common one that comes up with equivocation is, my dog has no nose. How does he smell? Terrible. And now, this is where we can play around. I'm going to go over fallacies of relevance, informal fallacies of relevance under the categories of omission, intrusion, and presumption. Fallacies of omission leave out necessary information to distract you, deliberate or unintentional. Intrusion is inserting unnecessary appeals or information. And lastly, presumption is failure to provide an adequate reason to affirm the the conclusion. Argumentum ad ignorantiam, using our lack of knowledge to prove its opposite. Argumentum ad nauseam, repetition means that it's a reputable argument. A bogus dilemma, a problem where none exists. Shifting the burden of proof, you just can't prove me wrong. Straw man, a misrepresentation of your opponent's position in order to knock it down. That's a commonly used one. Trivial objections. I'm opposed to building a new road. It will leave all of the maps that we have out of date. Unobtainable perfection. We should ban nuclear power because it will never be completely safe. Practice time. Informal omissions. Leaving out necessary information to distract. What are some examples of arguments that are ad nauseam logical fallacies? I'll give one example. This one comes back to the Nazi regime in Germany, where Goebbels said that if you repeat a lie enough times, it becomes the truth. Putting a mischaracterization of your opponent or their argument.
It's like almost any ad hominem, even poisoning the well
Mm-hmm.
is just, misrepresenting somebody's position so you can just have an easy argument to knock it down, even when they're right in front of you.
If you watch the talking heads on MSNBC, Fox, et cetera, lots of straw men come out and play. And of course, shifting the burden of proof. And like I said earlier, if someone puts a claim or an argument before you, it's not your job to prove or disprove their claim or argument. The burden of proof is upon that individual. Have you guys ever experienced any of these? And it just drove you crazy?
You can't live without them.
It's most frustrating when there's bystanders that are following along with the illogical argument and you have to kind of take the time to explain why the argument's wrong. That's probably the most frustrating. When it's 101, it's, you usually have time to talk it out.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm glad I've had 2 years of Latin in high school so I can understand some of these words.
Yeah. Well, what about street preachers and shifting the burden of proof? Do you know where you're going to go when you die? Hell exists, brother.
Kind of an offshoot of that would be, have you heard of something called the Gish Gallop? Where you just pepper somebody with arguments like 10 or 20, and it's not really shifting the burden, but nobody could kind of keep up with it. It sounds valid because you have so much information, even though it's all worthless. It's a form of debating, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of, where does the term that came up with the Trump presidency, whataboutism, where it's just like, no matter what kind of claim someone makes, they kind of distract with a totally unrelated subject. What about this?
I'm so glad you bring that up, because right here under intrusion, second from the bottom, exactly that. Too cocaine.
It's hard.
Too cocaine. That's what it is. So right here, you're ahead of the game, Christina. So fallacies of intrusion, emotional appeal. See any anti-abortion demonstration.
Yes.
Complete pathos, unbridled pathos. The genetic fallacy. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I have an aunt right now who's, for some reason in her life, she's decided to become obsessed about this idea of killing babies. Like, and it's really hard for me to argue with her about it because she has this like horrendous idea of something, but it's impossible just to get through to her.
Yeah.
Jason, where do they teach all these principles in college? What courses?
I'm guessing logic courses. Some of this you take some behavioral economics or political psychology courses, psychology courses, reasoning and rhetoric courses.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of this stuff before, but I can't remember when.
Yeah. And this is all, that's a really good point that you bring up, Jim. You've heard a lot of this before, and it's a lot of stuff. It's very jargony. And that's why if we call ourselves people of reason or a community of reason, we should go over these and understand what reason is. And while I was working on this a couple of years ago, I learned so much. And it was Mickey's idea to have this meeting back in, I think, what was it, 2009, initially, to go over logical fallacies. And so Mickey has the credit of coming up with this idea. And genetic fallacy, dismissing an argument because you don't like the source. Ad hominem. I'd tell you about what an ad hominem is, but you're too dumb to figure it out. Ignoratio elenchi. That this thesis is not relevant to the one that the arguer is trying to prove. It proves something else instead. Argumentum ad misericordem, turning to pity instead of a reasoned argument. Poisoning the well, discrediting your opposition before they respond. Only an idiot wouldn't know this one. Red herring, taking them off the scent of the real argument. Here's another one. This one is quite common when you're talking about policy direction. It's either the runaway train or the slippery slope. Then, of course, Christina said it, too coquet. It's where you cast the focus on someone doing something, presumably doing or allegedly doing something similar in order to undermine the discussion. Because you said the whataboutism that's at play right now in politics, this is usually identified with representatives of the president when they go on to talk shows and they say, well, what about Joe Biden and his son? Well, yes, we could talk about Hunter Biden and we can talk about this, but we're not talking about Hunter Biden at the moment. We're talking about this thing that's before us. And we'll might get to Hunter Biden later, but we need to talk about this particular thing right now. So don't change the subject. Like one thing that's in some of the books that I read on this when I was putting it together, one common example was, don't lecture me about drinking, you're an alcoholic. Argumentum ad verecundium, an appeal to false authority. Hundreds of leading scientists agree. Actually, this is a good one to have Jim here for. So Jim, when you saw those commercials from the past of 4 of 5 dentists agree, were you ever the 5th dentist?
I said, it's amazing to get 4 out of 5 agreeing on anything unless they're paid for it.
So, inserting unnecessary appeals or information. The genetic fallacy, you don't like where it comes from.
They don't like it because it comes from Snopes. Wikipedia.
Yeah. Or poisoning the well. where you're discrediting your opposition and their argument before you can argue on it.
I hear a lot of my conservative relatives talking about any sort of social relief as like, oh, they label it immediately as communist.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, you know, you're being a communist, or I can't think of exact examples, but it definitely poisons the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have a question on this one.
Sure.
If somebody says majority rules, and so democracy rules, so Hitler was right because he had the majority, he had the, uh, the rule, and so what he did to the Jews was right because he had the majority to make the rules. What fallacy is that?
Huh, that's an interesting one. So,
Argument from popularity.
yeah,
Okay.
all right. And we have one person trying to enter the,
Got it.
thank you. All right, yeah, that would be, like Craig said, argument from popularity.
There's another name for it, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of it, but Jim, that's a really good one. That would be a fallacy of intrusion. I don't have all of them listed here because there's a ton of them, but yeah, I would go with the argument from popularity. And of course, slippery slope. Okay, and we have the slippery slope argument as well.
Argumentum ad populum is
That's it. Thank you. Thank you for the Latin.
Google.
Wow, we've
Google ad uber alles.
Oh,
but that's German, so we can't listen to that. So therefore, the genetic fallacy has been touched on.
I had a question on the slippery slope.
Sure.
I'm trying to understand how it's a logical fallacy. Like, I've heard the slippery slope argument being made for gun control. I'm hearing it also being made for the proposition in California about increasing property tax for businesses, that, you know, if we do that, next step, they're going to come for residential property taxes. But I guess I'm wondering, like, some of that is possible that that could be the next step. Like, how is that a logical fallacy, I guess?
It's because I would say it's specifically a logical fallacy because these ones on the informal are valid arguments, but they're not necessarily sound. And if they do this, then they do that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do the other thing. But if we take that as those premises being true, then it's a valid argument. If A, then B, then therefore C, and yeah, if we presume that they're going to do this and then they're going to do the next, then that's the logical conclusion in a valid sense. But we don't know for sure if that third circumstance is going to happen. So therefore, if we're not 100, and keep in mind this comes down from deductive reasoning rather than inductive reasoning. So therefore, we're working from a theory, and if the premises are true, then it's sound and it's not a logical fallacy. But if either of the premises or both are questionable and they're not necessarily true, because deductive reasoning relies on true premises, then that's why this would be a logical fallacy. Oftentimes, a slippery slope is used in an alarmist regard. So it might be true, but we don't know that for sure. We can't predict the future.
Yeah, I would just add one thing. When you have something that you know to be true, but somebody used like the slippery slope argument, you're not saying that they're wrong. You're saying the argument is not sound. And that's a lot of the logical fallacies you have to understand. You can have a bad argument and still be correct. What they're saying is your argument is weak or your argument is using a fallacy. So if it's something about gun control or something, you could say, you could still believe you're right perhaps, but you have to go back and re-examine your argument. The argument is the problem, not necessarily your position or conclusion. It's your path to getting there was weak.
Yeah, and the thing is that there's a whole area of therapy in psychology called cognitive behavioral therapy that came out of Ellis's rational emotive therapy, and in it there are 10 cognitive distortions that are used to that you focus on in order to rewrite the cognitive programming in your head that causes that exacerbates trauma. And one of those is for the fortune teller error, and the slippery slope is the mechanism of the fortune teller error. And if you're correct with your slippery slope, we'll just give you a crystal ball because you're predicting the future. But that was a really good question. I have to say that was a really good question. On to the next
Great,
slide.
thanks for helping me with that. That makes sense.
And that's exactly why we're here too, because I am absolutely not an expert on this. And I'm not going to go down the Dunning-Kruger effect and say, hey, I read a couple books on this and I did a Wikipedia search and I put this presentation together over a few years, so therefore I'm a master over this. I too am just learning all of this. And one thing about the 101 series is there are certain things that I have a rather great depth of knowledge on, but other aspects of it, like today, like Mickey wanting to do this meeting and myself wanting to do this meeting, I largely want to do this meeting because I want to know more about logical fallacies. I want to learn the fun little terms. I want to treat logic like a game because logic can be a game. It's fun. And I want to be a better arguer, and I want to look at my own arguments and be able to point out other conditions, counterfactuals, et cetera, that would improve my arguments. Because I want to be, I don't want to be full of shit when it comes right down to it. I want to be honest. I want to be true, and I don't want to be completely out of my depth. And so I'm still learning this stuff, and I appreciate questions like that. And if anyone else thinks that I might be off on something, bring it up, because that's part of the 101 process that we're putting together. It's for all of us
Yes.
to build these and work on them. Jim.
Jason, you're very competitive. You want to win and dominate your opponents in arguments.
Well, that's part of it.
Jason.
Mike.
Yeah. How educated do you think people like Sean Hannity, Mark Levin, Steve Bannon, and other people that are controlling the propaganda on the airwaves and television, do you think they're well versed when they present these fallacious arguments? Are they well trained, instructed, or does it just happen that their form of BS, incorporates these things? But they're so successful, and it seems like some of the propaganda that ultimately ends on TV is tried out on the AM radio, like with Sean Hannity, and he'll throw out something to his radio crowd, and if it takes off, you'll see it on Fox News on TV the next day. Do you think these folks are well educated in this, or
I think,
or is it just coincidence?
I honestly think, from my perspective, people like Mark Levin and Sean Hannity are entertainers. They're entertainers. They put out their opinion, and I think that they probably have an innate talent to provoke people, which is why they've gotten so far. And they might be educated, and they might be might choreograph exactly how they're working their logic and reasoning, but at the same time they might just have an innate talent where they just know how to play this to get a reaction from the crowd.
Yeah,
And
we're so lucky that doesn't happen on CNN and NBC News and all that other side either.
yeah, Jim, you have a point too, that it's not just on the conservatives. The thing is that unless you're dealing with pure news, which Fox News does have some pure news on it, but the faces that you think of when you think of Fox News are the opinion broadcasters. Like O'Reilly was an opinion broadcaster on Fox. Hannity is an opinion broadcaster. Um, Chris Wallace is an opinion broadcaster. Rachel Maddow is an opinion broadcaster. They incorporate news, but all of them, regardless of their political bend, put a particular framing on what they're saying. And
How come we didn't ask put two more on the other side, just one on the one side? Is that a
well,
bias?
we can, okay, so let's see. Maybe because I don't really watch MSNBC or Fox, and I've been watching a Showtime movie based on Roger Ailes' life called The Loudest Person in the Room, starring Russell Crowe as Roger Ailes. So I've gotten reacquainted with members from Fox News, so they're in my head because I've been watching the Showtime show.
You've been
But
brainwashed.
There is a study called rhetoric. It's a little antiquated, but people used to study rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion. And it loosely uses logic, but it's more in tune to how people respond. When you're trying to persuade somebody, it isn't necessarily logic you're using, it's their perception of truth. So I do think there is a study in it. It's
yeah,
heavily used in marketing.
and the thing is that whether it's Chris Hayes, Rachel Maddow, Don Lemon, Megyn Kelly, they're entertainers, and they're there to provoke emotional responses. So you stay tuned long enough so you can buy what the sponsor is selling. But of course, someone in an opinion capacity to keep people on will definitely have some innate talent and ability to ask questions to use unsound logic, because we're not looking at academics or journalists, we're looking at opinion entertainers. But that's a good point to bring out the talking heads. So fallacies of presumption, abuse of analogy, an ad hominem using extraneous material, fallacy of accident, a freak feature of an exceptional case justifies the rule. For example, I ate at that restaurant once and I got food poisoning, I'm never going back. You might not have gotten food poisoning from there, or it might have been a bad case of chicken or something. Begging the question. Begging the question.
Begging the question needs to be renamed because that's been circumvented, or it's being misused. Everybody uses that when they want to say leads to the question.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very specific fallacy. It doesn't sound like, or it doesn't sound like what it's titled as.
Thank you. Bifurcation, presenting an either or argument where many more possibilities might exist. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, abductive reasoning. After this, on account of this, might be false causation. Sweeping generalizations, dicta simpliciter. Everyone knows that since morality comes from God and this atheist is acting morally, he mustn't be a sincere atheist. This is another one. The gambler's fallacy, thinking that one particular act might influence the next act when it might not. Thinking that if you're if you just keep putting the slot machine into the quarter into the slot machine, you have a better chance of winning. And you don't. It's a 50-50 shot each time. Unless, of course, they're rigged. Slot machines are rigged, but coin flips, thinking that the more you flip a coin, the more likely you are to get a heads or a tails. Secundum quid, hasty generalization. I guess that's another one. I ate there once and I got food poisoning, so therefore I'm not going back. And moving the goalpost. Practice time, begging the question, post hoc arguments, sweeping generalizations, and moving the goalpost.
Yeah, begging the question is the one I say it's always misused. It's misused in television journalism. They're always using it wrong. Really surprises me.
Begging the question is highly related to circular reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
I think for moving the goalpost, possibly might be the response to Black Lives Matter being All Lives Matter. I feel like the initial argument for Black Lives Matter is for a specific change in society, and the response is, don't worry about that. Everybody should have equality or something like that.
I think that might be a decent example. Moving the standard of proof down the road.
I always figured that's a disingenuous response and a lack of understanding of basic grammar when somebody says that.
Yeah, me too.
The implication is that no one else matters. It just doesn't. It's a very disingenuous response, but.
Yeah.
Is packing the Supreme Court moving the goalposts?
What was that?
I don't think so.
Packing the Supreme Court moving the goalposts.
No, I don't think so. And that wouldn't be a logical fallacy. That's just a change in policy direction. That's a change in policy direction.
But people would call it moving the goalpost.
Well, I don't think it's moving the goalpost necessarily. But to be able to understand logical fallacies, you have to understand that the burden of proof is on the other person in an argument. That when you're talking linguistically, equivocation, you have to use mutually accepted terminology. You should seek to avoid using fallacies yourself, and don't take advantage of logical fallacies to manipulate others. Additionally, realize that there's a difference between truth and value, is versus ought, for example, and constantly monitor and investigate your own thoughts and ideas, and always strive to be better every single day. And in conclusion, your brain strives for consistency and doesn't care what you think. There are both deliberate and unintentional deviations from sound logic that have the potential to exploit you, and critical thought is your inoculation. All right, so now it's just discussion time. All right. What are your thoughts on this? And did you find today helpful?
A lot of it's really new to me, so I'm definitely interested.
So
this shows I have a lot more knowledge to gain to be competitive and talking with people.
Mm-hmm. And that's a position we should all be at, that position where we could all learn something and grow as thinkers. So quick question, if he's at his microphone, Mickey, this was your idea almost a decade ago, or a decade ago. Are you happy that we brought it back?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I think it's, we always hear these things when we're listening to news or debating somebody in the grocery line or anything like that. And even though it's not useful to say, oh, you're making an argument from ignorance, because that's the title of that fallacy, which is very demeaning. But the point is that they're saying, because I don't know something, therefore it must be this thing. You know, I have no proof, but it could only be this. So it's nice to point out that not necessarily to say, oh, you're using a logical fallacy, but to understand the structure of their response so that you can go at the weakness in the fallacy. You can say, you're making a claim that you're drawing a conclusion without any information. Without supplying any information, you're assuming something, because that's what most of these logical fallacies require, is that our brains are satisfied by the structure, but not by the content. And the content that's missing in argument from ignorance is all of it. There's no content. So yeah. So rather than attacking people and saying you're using a logical fallacy, they won't even understand that. But knowing what a logical fallacy is and how it's constructed and how it appears to satisfy logical rules gives us, I think, gives me a tool so that I can calmly take their argument apart, and in a way that they will see, that there's a weakness in their argument. And it also helps me to keep from constructing arguments that lack substance, because I'm in I'm in recovery programs, and I present myself as an atheist, skeptic, non-believer, agnostic, whatever. And so I have to be, there's a little book called Four Agreements. I have to be impeccable in my word. And that's one of the agreements. And part of that is that when I talk, I don't pepper my conversation with logical fallacies. So it's as much a way of managing my own speech and my own interactions with others, because a lot of times logical fallacies will fall flat. People won't fall for them. They won't necessarily know why, but they'll feel like they're being bullshitted, and they are. And they will be. And I had a great reputation for being a BS artist in my late 20s. And I did not even know that. And someone pointed it out to me, and I was like, oh my God, I have been kind of a jackass. So I appreciate having, I have an app, Logical Fallacy app on my phone that I've had for 10 years that you refer to once in a while. So there's if you're into it and you just look up logical fallacies, there's a lot of resources, and there's quite a few logical fallacies that you can pick through. A lot of them overlapping, but they're a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
This is great news to learn, because I'm living with my son and my daughter is visiting. We sit around the breakfast table for about an hour arguing all kinds of stuff. And we never get anywhere because we don't understand the arguments, all the fallacies we're doing. So if we're able to know them, then we can avoid misunderstandings that we have all the time. So this is helpful to me, and I'll start pointing out where they can get more knowledge so they can won't be torn apart in their arguments.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. And I have forgotten that that was my idea. I was trying to think of a logical fallacy to describe what I started with, but I couldn't think of one.
Well, thank you, Mickey. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Any other thoughts on this? I personally got a lot out of putting this presentation together, touching back on the aspects of logic, and I think that I'd like to see us have a speaker on logic and cognitive science, because there are other things like causality, for example, with J.L. Mackey's Inus conditions, looking at things that are necessary and sufficient in order for things to happen, and things that are, et cetera, et cetera.
I think you can go through the exercise too when you're doing your discussions on Saturday. You know, if there is a logical fallacy in a piece of news, you know, to kind of throw that question out there. Because I know the ones that I really, you know, it's the 80-20 rule. The ones I really pay attention to are the ones that I am always on the lookout for myself, like confirmation bias, cherry picking, and things like that, that your own thought process needs to try to avoid. So the other ones, they're hard to remember because they, you know, they don't pop up as often.
Yeah. Okay.
I really like this, and it made me wonder if somebody is drawing a conclusion and their support has one or many logical fallacies. To me, that's an indication that the conclusion should be suspect. And if they can't make, you know, if they can't justify that conclusion without using logical fallacies, then maybe either they're uninformed or they need more information, or they're making an incorrect conclusion. But I don't know if that's sound reasoning. What I just made, I don't know if that is sound reasoning or not.
Well, a poorly formed argument will allow somebody to actually question a valid conclusion. So if you do have something that should have a logic or should have a formally good argument, and you don't, you're just allowing it to get picked apart for no reason. So you really want to have a good argument so that people don't question it, because really there's something called a fallacy, and that is just because your argument is poor doesn't mean the conclusion is false. But you waste a lot of time and you get the chance to be picked apart if you don't formulate your argument. You're doing a disservice to your cause if you don't think carefully about the way you present your argument. So I guess that's what I'm saying.
That's a good point. Thanks.
Oh, good. Yeah, and for next year when we put this together again, I want to see us come up with some kind of games associated with it. I wish I had more time to put something like this together, to come up with games, to put up examples, and then like a multiple guess scenario afterwards, and then funny examples. And this is also why I like to innovate with this particular type of programming, so that way in the future, for those who really like this, like Mickey and Craig and Christina and Jim, we could spend a few meetings on Tuesday nights working to discuss how we present this, and then coming up with funny examples, and make this a collaborative effort.
Yeah, you have to make your lectures interesting and not just, you know, so academic that just turn people off, but they still have to learn the basics, but you still got to get people to listen.
Yeah.
You gotta, you know, satisfy their interests, whatever.
Yeah.
Jason,
Mm-hmm.
what about logical fallacy flashcards you could show on the screen for us?
That works too. If we did this in person, we could break off into groups and just have a group project where the lecture is a bit shorter, but the thing is that we'll go into this group scenario where we get 50 people together or 100. We break off into groups to come up with funny examples.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Like one group becomes really good at their own logical fallacy.
Yeah, and then for next year too, and the reason I'm just putting this up like this is collaborative. In the near future, I'm going to have this on our website for next year about what months that we're going to be doing which Humanism 101, and that way we can plan them together. And on our Tuesday night meetings, we can pair off and say, hey, I want to work on this too, and that way the month before or 2 months before, we could put out the curriculum like logical fallacy flashcards, and maybe use that as a revenue stream for the group as well, that we put out materials and we charge a little bit of money for it as a bit of a fundraiser, and that way we work through it. And I think that this type of thing
Does anybody have any high artistic ability that would be interested in designing some cool cards for our group?
Yeah, we need someone with a graphic design background. Christina, did you raise your hand?
Oh, well, no, the idea with the cards is really interesting. It makes me think of that game where you have like I don't know, a name of somebody or some object, and you have to hold it up on your forehead like that, and everyone guesses. But if we're discussing a particular subject or arguing a subject, then you could try to read people's examples of the logical fallacies. So like you argue the topic with a logical fallacy, and the person holding the card would have to guess.
That's
There'd be some kind of app or something.
Yeah. I would struggle with it at first, I'm sure, but maybe we could narrow it down to just a few logical fallacies at a time.
In poker, we call that game the Indian. We held up a card and everybody could see it, and you have to guess if you had the better card or they didn't, as you bet.
Christina, you have a really good idea. And what we could do is we could modify that so that you have the logical fallacy on the card attached to your head. And then what happens is everyone else in the room has to treat you like you're making that particular logical fallacy and you're supposed to guess.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, that's a good game.
I like that. That sounds like a good idea.
But through Zoom, you would definitely know that. I mean, like you would be peeking constantly. Be hard on Zoom.
Or if someone would say, "Let me help you so you don't fall down." What do you mean? Yeah, the floor is kind of iffy. Oh, am I on a slippery slope?
Nice.
He did say he liked puns.
Which is equivocation. It's equivocation. Well, this is good. Well, I hope that this didn't get, because of course the 101s are going to be a little bit more dry than the regular, the topical speakers. So I hope that we didn't lose people because it got too dry in the middle. But I'm glad that we stuck around for this, because this was I found this enriching, and I like the fact that we could go over logical fallacies, and we're doing this A, because we want to be together as a group, and B, we want to be better thinkers, and hopefully we don't want to take advantage of other people. Any last thoughts from today? All right, Craig, any last thoughts from Humanism 101 Critical Thinking?
Well, if your argument is sound, you automatically get the last word.
All right. Mike, any last thoughts on Humanism Critical Thinking?
Could you imagine a single Republican across the country or a Trump supporter that would have any interest at all in this topic? And I wonder why.
Oh, shade has been thrown. Jim, your last word.
Well, I try to get along with people and do the switching, what do you call it? um, where you switch to get along with people.
Play devil's
In other
advocate.
words, I don't say right off that I'm an atheist because right away I turn a lot of people off. I say, sure, I believe in God. I'm not a, I'm not a godless person, but I don't tell them my definition of God, which is the unknowable. And there they don't think I'm such a bad person because I'm not godless. It's just a game you have to play. If you want to get people on your side, you got to find out what they agree with. What you like about them and what you can agree upon. But if you turn them off right just because you say something, they just turn them right off. That defeats your purpose of trying to get along or trying to convert somebody to your way of thinking on something. That's all I could say.
All right, thank you, Jim. Christina, any last thoughts?
I really appreciated, I want to say either it was Mickey or Craig who said that this could become more of a tool to be gentle with others when having a discussion so that you don't do a disservice to your own cause, which I tend to definitely, that's a pitfall of mine because I get a little emotional. So I'd like to develop more logical and rational thinking and arguing skills. So thank you for the whole thing.
You want to gently murder them. That's right.
All right. AJ, any final thoughts?
Hi. Well, I'm glad to join this group because I've been interested in this. As in college, I mentioned that I learned about the how the arguments held. I just wanted to learn how to hold the arguments, but then I found out there is logical fallacies. So I end up learning completely different skill like rhetorics and just deviate through the BS a lot of it. So it's really helpful, and I'm glad that you held in this session.
Thank you. Ray, final thoughts.
Oh, sorry, Jason. Can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
I just want to say hello to the group and apologies for being late. I appreciate the topic that I came into regarding logical fallacies. I think that if more people understood them, it would probably save a lot of stress in any given situation or day, and help with communication. So I like this topic especially. And I hope everybody has a good evening.
Thank you, Ray. Jeremy, any final thoughts?
Yes, I have a really I guess mild or strong interest in logical fallacies. I just find it really interesting, and I do have I had an experience where I was arguing about something with a friend, and I told them that they were making a logical fallacy, and I regret saying that because I think from that person's perspective, like that person felt like I was calling them stupid, and that wasn't my intention, but that's what they felt like, and that they felt that I was, crowning myself an authority on logic by making that statement. And so I think, yeah, I'm really going to hesitate from using that kind of language in the future against anyone saying that they're making a logical fallacy. I want to find a more artful, tactful way of bringing up the concept of logical fallacies without accusing anybody of violating those principles.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of used to view arguments and debates as more of an art. That's just kind of like, there's so many ways to do it, and you just got to figure out how to do it. And I like how the concept of logical fallacies brings a little bit of science or math into it and kind of more structure. So I like that combination of art plus structure in debating and arguing. So thank you.
You bring up some really good points, and to echo what Christina echoed, this is a great way to become more kinder and gentler with the people in our everyday lives. And Jeremy, you bring up a really great point that logic and argument are not something that we inherently know. It's something that we have to work with and to develop a skill set in. There are certain things that we perceive that are unfair or that might come off as hypocritical, but to understand the workings of logic and reasoning, it's something that we have to pursue and something that we have to develop. And yes, debate and oratory are art forms that require practice, they require maintenance, and if you can do it right, it's a fantastic way to intellectually play with other people in a back and forth wonderful combat where you're both respecting each other and you're respecting each other enough to hold each other to the highest standards of structural integrity for their arguments. And when you have a higher standard of structural integrity for your argument, you're also keeping not only them on the top of their game, but you're keeping yourself on the top of your game, and you're having an almost religious attachment to the idea of truth. And I think that that's incredibly worthwhile. All right, well, everyone, thank you for joining us for Humanism 101. Next weekend, we have, I should say, this upcoming week, we have our Humanist women's group, and that is going to be Monday at 6. I'm sharing the meetup link for that right now. Thank you, Christina. And then we have our weekly strategy session Tuesday night. Wednesday night is our LGBT social meeting. Saturday is coffee and conversation. And next Sunday, we have Dr. Joseph McKenna talking about a history of atheism. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.